As we were talking about before, this case is multifaceted, and you garnered a lot of relevant testimony, which I would like to discuss. So can you please explain to the viewers the major legal issues that are in this case so people can understand it?
Absolutely. So the travel mandates, it's actually not a law that's passed by Parliament. It was an executive decision that was made by the Minister of Transportation. And these mandates were enacted in 2021 without the input of Parliament generally. So these were effectively unilateral government decisions. And we challenged the government decision by way of a judicial review. And we're challenging them on the basis that they're not compliant with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom. In other words, they're unconstitutional. And they're unconstitutional because they overtly restrict a person's Section 6 rights, which is your mobility right to travel, both within the country and outside of Canada. And they're not saved by Section 1. And we say that because we don't believe that the scientific rationale or the public health rationale was strong enough to justify suspending the mobility rights of unvaccinated Canadians.
Okay. Thank you. But I think our viewers need just a little bit, unpacking there, because you mentioned Section 1. And so, for all our viewers, Section 1 is part of the Constitution where our rights in our Constitution are guaranteed, but they're not absolute. And if a government is to infringe upon them, they may do so, but there's a test that has to be applied to govern and warrant why the infringement would happen. And that test is the Oakes test based on Section 1. So can you tell us a little bit about this test and now why the onus is now on the government, based on the testimony that you received, of why it's incumbent upon them to prove that when they violated your plaintiff's Section 6 mobility rights, that it was justified and warranted?
Right. So you're absolutely right. The onus is on the government, and the government is going to have to demonstrate under, as you mentioned, the Oakes test, that there's an important objective, which of course is an important objective to protecting the health and safety of Canadians. Nobody's disputing that, but it depends on how microscopic you get with respect to the objective, because if you want to look at the objective in the lens of the transportation sector, there wasn't really ever a significant threat to the health and safety of passengers in the context of transportation during the pandemic. And certainly we haven't seen any evidence of that based on the record that was produced by the Attorney General. And there needs to be a rational connection. So the measures that you have in place need to be rationally connected to the objective, and it needs to be proportionate. And the government ought to made some effort to find what's called minimal impairment, which it means, you have a series of policy options, for example, testing. Well, why is testing not acceptable? Why was mandatory vaccination required when there are other alternatives, such as testing, such as masking, that could satisfy the objective of keeping people safe in the transportation system? Yeah,
so going back to, Section 1, and so what it really comes down to is that when the government, the federal government, decided to put this travel vaccine mandate, they were using that under the auspices of the Aeronautics Act, which is where they have the legislative power in order to make decisions and rules regarding mobility rights. And so what happened there is that within that act, there is a possibility where they could infringe on some rights if they had a safety reason. And so what's interesting is that you're saying, and it's based on the testimony that you received, that the safety issue that they had and that they're claiming was not based on any scientific or medical reason, correct?
Well, I'm not even sure they understand what the safety reason was. And I say that because there's no quantification of the safety reason. I'll give you an example. When I was cross-examining individuals within Transport Canada, they testified that the vaccine helped reduce the number of, how many employees were absent because of COVID. And obviously reducing absenteeism at work is important to keeping the operations going, to keeping the airport going, keeping, railway going. And when I asked them, well, did you ever have any data in terms of how many people were absent from work prior to the vaccine, which is an important baseline level of comparison? They didn't have that data. So you can't tell me that the vaccines are miraculous and help so many people prevent COVID and avoid getting COVID if you don't even know how many people had COVID to begin with before the vaccine era. And so there was no real quantification or analysis for the risk. I mean, there was no report, for example, that says there was significant disruption in supply chain, significant disruption in flights, significant disruption in railway because people were sick, or because people didn't want to show up to work because their colleagues were not vaccinated. They had no such information. So I'm unsure how and I'm still unsure how the government came to this conclusion.
Yes, I did read a little bit of the testimony you garnered, and it seems a little strange based on the fact that they were asking for medical and scientific reasons to justify the mandate, but yet somehow they never received it. And I do really want to talk about that in more detail, but we just have to take a break. So we'll see you soon.